Welcome to Story Planet, where every story is a journey of wonder. The Autumn Guestbook is a cozy, heartfelt tapestry woven from whispered memories, fading leaves, and the quiet strength we find when we slow down. It's a gentle collection of lives paused in time, each guest leaving behind more than just a name, each page offering warmth, reflection, and a soft return to self. Get cozy, relax, and let the story gently unfold. Perfect for unwinding before the night, or whenever you need a moment of calm. Shall we begin? The wind curled like a whisper through the thinning trees, carrying with it the golden scent of drying leaves and distant wood smoke. The sky above was draped in soft clouds, pale and low, and the road wound gently through the hills like a ribbon someone had let fall. Maribel sat behind the wheel of her aging car, a soft hum beneath her, the windows slightly cracked to let in the crisp scent of late October. She had been driving for hours, maybe longer than she intended. The highway behind her had given way to narrow lanes, then to gravel roads, and now this, a winding path she didn't remember choosing, but somehow felt right. She hadn't run away. Not really. But she had left behind something that no longer made her heart rise in the morning. The city, her job, the calendar stacked with things to do but no joy to hold on to. So she packed 2 bags, left a note on her kitchen counter, and just drove, no destination, just distance, and the hope that somewhere peace might be waiting. A bend in the road led her through a tunnel of trees dressed in fire and gold. Just as the late afternoon light fell sideways, making everything glow, and then there it was, a weathered wooden sign, half hidden by ivy, leaning slightly with time. Maple Hollow Inn. She slowed instinctively, gravel crackling beneath the tires. The road curved gently into a clearing, and the sight before her made her inhale sharply, like she had stumbled into a dream. The inn looked like it had been pulled from the pages of a storybook. A wide, welcoming cottage wrapped in amber light. Pumpkins and dried flowers lined the porch steps. Golden vines curled around the windows, and smoke drifted lazily from the chimney into the dusky sky. Maribel stepped out of the car, boots crunching on fallen leaves. The air smelled like cinnamon and cedarwood, and the quiet settled around her like an old friend. As she stepped inside, a brass bell jingled overhead and warmth embraced her. Worn wooden floors creaked gently beneath her feet, a fire crackled in the hearth, and the scent of baking apples wrapped itself around her heart. "Welcome," said a woman from behind the front desk, her voice soft as wool. "Room 7's waiting for you. But first, let me make you a cup of something warm." Maribel followed her into a little parlor where the teapot was already steaming. She was handed a mug of spiced chamomile and invited to sit near the window that looked out at the flaming red maple tree just beyond the porch. She didn't speak much, just listened, breathed, and for the first time in what felt like years, she felt still inside. Later, the woman led her up the narrow staircase to a hallway bathed in golden lamplight, and opened the door to room 7. It was perfect. Warm yellow walls, a window seat with a view of the woods, a thick patchwork quilt folded at the end of the bed, books on a shelf that looked well-loved, and a fireplace in the corner already glowing with soft embers. Maribel let her bags fall gently to the floor and turned in a slow circle. If someone had asked her to draw the place where she might want to spend the rest of her days, this would have been it. And then she noticed the notebook. It lay on the nightstand, leather-bound and worn. A soft brown cover with a gold-embossed leaf in the corner. There was no title, only a velvet ribbon tucked between the pages like a secret. She picked it up, curiosity tugging at her fingers, and opened to the first page. To those who find themselves here, stay a while. Leave only what you wish, take only what you need. She turned the page, a story waited. Not a name or a date, but a story told like a memory of someone who had once stayed in this very room, and what they had found here. Each sentence was tender, rich with reflection. And before she knew it, Maribel was drawn in. She read 3 pages before gently closing the cover, her fingers resting there a moment longer. She had an idea then. What if she read just one story each night? Like a ritual, every evening after a day of quiet wandering, she would return to this room, slip under the quilt, and read the story of someone who had once stood where she now stood. She smiled to herself. Yes, that's what she would do. The next morning, after a breakfast of warm scones and pear preserves, Maribel set out with her journal and scarf, wandering the woods beyond the inn. The trees whispered above her, and golden leaves fluttered around her like notes of a silent song. But always, in the back of her mind, she thought of the story she had read, replaying its words like a favorite melody. By dusk, she was back in room 7, her slippers soft against the rug, her tea steaming on the side table. She lit the little lamp by the bed, turned down the quilt, and curled up beneath it. The notebook waited. And when she opened it again, the ribbon was already marking the next story. She read slowly, savoring every line, letting the words carry her far away and gently inward all at once. And when the story ended, she turned off the lamp, smiled into the darkness, and dreamed of quiet windows, ticking clocks, and the way some stories stay with you long after the page is turned. The ribbon sat gently against the page, as if someone had placed it there with care, and whispered, "Begin here." Maribel settled deeper into the bed, the quilt pulled up beneath her chin. A mug of tea steamed on the table, half sipped, the scent of honey and apple rising into the amber-lit room. The fireplace crackled softly across the room, like a storyteller warming up. She opened the notebook, written in neat, elegant cursive. "My name is Laurent, and once upon a time." I listened more closely to the ticking of clocks than to my own breath. For most of my life, I was a clockmaker. Not the kind who mass-produced digital timekeepers, but a maker of heirlooms, of hush and harmony, of gears that whispered instead of clicked. I had a shop tucked between a cobbler and a flower stall, the kind of place you didn't find unless you were meant to. My customers came for the silence between the seconds, for the gentle rhythms that made their homes feel whole. But cities don't stand still. They rise, they hurry, they drown out the delicate. The flower stall closed, the cobbler moved to an app, and suddenly people wanted loud alarms, smart displays, voices in boxes that told them the time rather than letting them feel it. And my hands began to tremble. It was slight at first, a shake in the mornings, then in the middle of engraving. I couldn't carve the tiny initials anymore. My tools felt foreign. My quiet shop echoed with nothing but old dust and failing purpose. So I left. No farewell signs, no notice, just a closed sign and a bag of clothes. I told no one where I was going, because I didn't know. I followed the roads that curved more than they cut. I watched the horizon until the horizon softened. And one afternoon, beneath a sky that had just begun to melt into amber, I found it. Maple Hollow Inn. The sign looked like it belonged in a memory, half covered in ivy. The kind of place that doesn't ask questions. I stepped inside, and a woman with kind eyes handed me a room key and a slice of warm pear tart. She told me the fire had just been lit in room 4. Room 4. A small space with a tall, narrow window where light fell like poetry across the floorboards. I sat on the edge of the bed, and for the first time in many years, I let the quiet settle inside me. I unpacked only one thing, a sketchbook. For days, I drew only windows, tall ones, wide ones, circular ones like portholes to daydreams. I imagined what lived behind them, the stories they framed, the people who leaned against their sills and watched the world. My pencils whispered across the paper, finally steady again. One morning, I found a small box on the mantel, cherrywood, with a brass clasp that creaked when opened. Inside were carving tools, so familiar I could have wept. I chose the smallest chisel and carved a window no larger than a coin. It had shutters that opened and closed. It was delicate and slow and mine. Each night, I sat beside the fireplace, warm tea in hand, my fingers brushing the grain of the wood, remembering the feel of precision without pressure. And one night, I wrote this: time isn't always something to keep. Sometimes it's something to look through, to breathe beside, to rest within. Before I left, I placed the little window on the night beside a folded note. If the world ever rushes past you again, hold this, look through it, and remember that quiet is never far away. I never returned to the city. I found a cottage of my own, beside a creek, where clocks were not made, but listened to, when the wind rattled the shutters, and the sun slipped past the curtains. And if you are reading this, know that peace is not always a place. Sometimes it's a window, and sometimes it's simply the chance to see yourself clearly in the stillness. Maribel's hands rested gently over the page. She felt the silence in the words like a blanket tucked around the soul. She reached for the back pocket of the notebook, and there it was. A tiny wooden frame, cherry-toned, with shutters that folded inward. She held it to her eye. Through it, she saw the maple tree swaying slowly outside, its branches lit in silver moonlight. It wasn't just a window, it was an invitation. To be still, to breathe, to let go. She set it beside her lamp, turned off the light, and beneath the quilt, warmed by story and stillness, she drifted to sleep, dreaming of shuttered windows, of carved hands and quiet clocks, and the time that waits for no one, except those who dare to stop. The next morning at Maple Hollow was painted in light, soft golden beams streaming through the trees, dappling the wooden floors of the inn. Maribel wandered the woods in a wool shawl, a small woven basket in her hand for pine cones and pressed leaves. She followed deer tracks for a while, then sat near the stream and wrote a few lines in her notebook. But her thoughts kept drifting back to the night before, to Laurent's story, to the little wooden window now resting on her nightstand like a secret. By late afternoon, her fingers tingled from the chill, her cheeks warmed by the wind, and her heart buzzed with anticipation. Tonight would bring another story. And so, just as the fire began to crackle downstairs, and the scent of something sweet floated up from the kitchen, Maribel returned to her room, drew the curtains, and made her tea. She fluffed the pillows, smoothed the quilt, and nestled into the center of the bed with the notebook once again in her lap. The ribbon had moved, and beneath it, a new story waited, written in loopy, bold handwriting that swirled like wind across the page. Hello. If you're reading this, I hope you're somewhere warm, with something sweet in your hand. My name is Sasha, and I arrived here by accident, or maybe by magic, or maybe both. It had been raining for 7 days straight. 7. Just like the number of secrets I was keeping from myself. I'd been traveling for weeks, hopping trains, walking with strangers, sleeping in borrowed beds and whispering wishes into espresso foam. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew what I was running from. Expectations, routines, a city full of mirrored buildings reflecting a version of me I didn't recognize anymore. One morning, I left behind a job with a title I never earned, a ring I never asked for, and a dream that had expired quietly without telling anyone. I took only a yellow umbrella, a notebook, and a pair of boots that squeaked when I walked too fast. It rained in every town I visited. And that umbrella, that umbrella was more than a shelter. It was my shield, my banner, my sunny rebellion. People noticed me, smiled at me, sometimes offered pie or poetry. In one town, a florist gave me a marigold just because it matched my umbrella. In another, I sat beside an old man in a library who read me a poem from memory, just because he liked the way I held still while listening. One night, I helped a young mother carry groceries through puddles, and she invited me in for tea and honeyed bread. We spoke little, but shared laughter over nothing and everything, like old friends wearing new faces. That umbrella brought me strangers who felt like gifts. One afternoon, when I was soaked and singing to myself in the middle of nowhere, I found a sign half hidden by branches, Maple Hollow Inn. I followed the scent of wood smoke up the gravel drive, past trees that bowed like old friends. The woman who opened the door didn't flinch when she saw me, dripping and humming and slightly lost. She said, "Room 2 has a window that likes the rain." She was right. I stayed 4 nights, and every one of those nights, I curled up by the window and watched the raindrops race. I baked in the kitchen. I picked wild herbs and arranged them in mismatched mugs. I borrowed a brush and painted little suns all over my yellow umbrella. I left poems on napkins, lemon peels in the sugar bowl, and laughter echoing down the halls. There was something sacred about those days. Something simple and untamed. I felt like a child again. Or maybe a version of myself I hadn't met before. Someone who laughed freely, who danced barefoot on the porch, who told stories to the thunder and secrets to the steam of her tea. One afternoon, I found an old record player tucked in the corner of the parlor, and played an Edith Piaf album until the sun dipped low. I danced with my eyes closed, letting the music pull memories from places I didn't know existed. I drew silly sketches in the margins of magazines, made flower crowns out of weeds, and I wrote letters I would never send to people who had left fingerprints on my life. The inn gave me space for all of it. I listened more, spoke less, and every night before sleep, I would whisper thank you to the walls, as if the inn had ears. And maybe, I think it did. This place didn't just give me shelter. It reminded me that joy doesn't have to be loud to be wild. It reminded me that I was allowed to be light-hearted again, allowed to be unrooted and radiant. On my last night, I took a photo of myself standing in the front garden, the umbrella open above me, and the inn glowing behind me. I tucked that photo into the back of this book, in case you need to see someone who found her way back to herself, or at least started to. And if you ever find yourself dancing in the rain or painting sunshine where it isn't, just know you're not alone. With joy, Sasha. Maribel reached carefully into the notebook's back pocket, and there she was, a young woman with a bright smile, messy hair, and a yellow umbrella splashed with little suns, standing in the very garden Maribel had passed just hours ago. She studied the photo for a long moment. It made her feel lighter somehow, as if some part of Sasha's joy had drifted out of the frame and into her room. She placed it gently on the nightstand beside the wooden window frame from the night before. She turned off the lamp, pulled the quilt closer, and drifted to sleep, with laughter on the edges of her dreams, and a soft yellow glow lighting the path ahead. The next evening at Maple Hollow arrived with a hush. The trees stood still as if listening, and the breeze carried the faintest chill of early twilight. Maribel returned from a walk along the mossy trail by the old stone bridge, her coat pockets filled with acorns and pale feathers. Her boots were muddy, her cheeks were pink, and her heart was already curled around the next story. After a warm supper by the fire and a few quiet sips of rosemary tea, she made her way upstairs to room 7, the place that had become more sanctuary than stopover. She tucked herself into the quilt, fluffed the pillows just so, and opened the notebook. The ribbon had moved again. Another story was ready. The handwriting here was careful, slanted, steady, written in midnight blue ink. My name is Orion. I wasn't named for the stars, but I chased them anyway. There was a time when I believed the sky could teach me how to live. When I was a boy, I would lie in my backyard with my father's telescope, sketching the constellations into the margins of my school books. I made up stories for the ones without names, whispered them into the wind like they were secrets meant only for the moon. I imagined each star was a traveler, like me, passing through the universe looking for home. As I grew older, the magic didn't vanish, but it got buried beneath degrees, expectations, routines wrapped in schedules and coffee-stained papers. Years passed, and I became what I was supposed to become, a professor. A well-dressed speaker of facts. I wrote textbooks instead of poetry. I mapped known stars instead of chasing new ones. My lectures were admired, my credentials applauded, but inside there was a quiet echo that grew louder with each passing year. And then one day, the silence hit me like a falling meteor. I realized I hadn't looked at the sky in months. That night, I closed my laptop, stepped out onto my balcony, and stared upward until my neck ached. The stars were still there, but I no longer remembered their names. That scared me, so I packed a bag, no destination, only a direction, away. I drove until the road turned to gravel, until the trees pressed close, until the signal vanished, and that's when I saw the sign. Maple Hollow Inn. It looked like something out of a childhood dream or a forgotten story. I didn't hesitate. The woman at the front desk handed me a brass key and said, "Room 6 has a skylight." Room 6. The moment I stepped inside, I knew I would stay longer than planned. There was a telescope already set near the window, a worn armchair, a wool blanket folded over the back, and a little notebook tucked beside the bed. That first night, I didn't unpack. I just stared through the skylight as Orion's belt climbed into view. And I felt small, but in a good way. I sat for hours tracing the sky with my fingers. Each night after that, I returned to sketching. Not star charts, but sky stories. I mapped the things I missed, the things I still hoped for, the constellations I made up just for myself. One was shaped like a coffee mug. I called it Comforta. Another like two hands reaching for each other. I named it Reunionis. I imagined one shaped like a bird with open wings, soaring upward, Liberata. I traced lines between real stars and imagined ones, letting them form tales in the dark, until my eyes fluttered closed and dreams took over. By day, I let the inn shape me gently, like water over stone. I wandered the woods and found a fallen branch that curved just like a crescent moon. I carved my initials into it and leaned it near the garden gate. I made tea blends from wild mint and dried rose hips. I read children's books in the library nook, I even tried baking a loaf of bread. It turned out too dense to eat, but made the kitchen smell like forgiveness. I helped the innkeeper repair an old weather vane, climbed onto the roof under a quilt of clouds, and laughed when the wind nearly stole my scarf. I didn't check my phone once. There was no signal, but more than that, there was no need. One afternoon, I sat beneath a tree and cried for reasons I couldn't explain, and the wind wrapped around me like it understood. The inn became a place where I didn't have to be anyone. I stopped shaving, started humming. I mailed a postcard to my sister that just said, "I remembered how to dream again." I watched squirrels build nests, studied the way frost kissed the window panes in the morning, and found beauty in the tiniest things, a spider web catching dew, the sound of a drawer closing softly, the way leaves curled inward at night. Before I left, I copied my favorite made-up constellation into the back of this notebook. It's the shape of a heart that's slightly uneven, with a trail behind it like a comet. I named it Beginna, because that's what this place gave me. A beginning. If you ever find yourself under a dark sky, and you see a cluster of stars that doesn't fit any name you know, maybe it's one of mine. Maybe it's one of yours. And maybe that's all we need sometimes, to remember we're still part of something infinite. Clear skies, Orion. Maribel stared at the page for a long moment, then tilted her head back toward her own ceiling, where the soft moonlight filtered through the lace curtain. She imagined stars out there, winking like old friends. She closed the notebook gently, ran her thumb over the curve of Orion's name, and whispered it like a wish. The constellations outside might have changed, but inside, she was still tracing the stories. The morning after Orion's story lingered in Maribel's thoughts like starlight, soft and far-reaching. She moved slowly through the day, as if wrapped in the hush of the night sky he had painted with his words. She walked the orchard path, hands in her coat pockets, passing rows of golden trees where sunlight dripped like syrup through the branches. Her mind wandered. She imagined each leaf as a star, each gust of wind a message from a traveler who had once stood where she stood now. She lingered longer in the reading nook downstairs that day, watching the fire flicker and sipping tea brewed with honey and thyme. She didn't speak much, and no one asked her to. The inn was good like that. It let you be. By the time the sky dimmed to violet and supper was served, a creamy parsnip soup with warm bread and a cinnamon crumble for dessert, Maribel was already picturing her blanket, her quilt, and the waiting ribbon in the notebook. That night, in room 7, the air felt still and sacred. A hush wrapped around her like a second comforter. She opened the notebook and found the ribbon had moved once more. This story, the last one in the book, had no title. The handwriting was soft, almost unsure in its beginning, but steadied as it went. My name isn't important, not anymore. If you're reading this, then you've probably read the others too. You've seen the people who passed through these walls, who arrived with full hearts or broken ones, who found what they didn't know they needed. Me? I didn't arrive like that. I didn't arrive at all. I stayed. Years ago, I came to Maple Hollow Inn like the rest, just a guest. Just someone trying to breathe through the weight of the world. My story was simple. Tired teacher, recent widow, city too loud, heart too quiet. I didn't intend to stay. In fact, I had a train ticket in my pocket the entire first week. I could have left any day. But each morning, the air smelled sweeter, and each night, the silence held me longer. The innkeeper at the time, Clara, had eyes like soft pine and a voice like bread just out of the oven. She said, "Some places find people, not the other way around." She let me stay a second week, then a month. Then she taught me how to braid herbs, steep tea, and bake scones that crumble just right. We painted shutters in the spring and fed chickadees in winter. And then one autumn, she left me the key. Just like that, she said, "It's your turn now." I was stunned. I had never asked, but I think the inn had. That was 23 years ago. Since then, I've watched hundreds of guests pass through these doors. I've poured tea for tired parents, wandering artists, runaway lovers, quiet thinkers, and aching hearts. I've changed bedding for poets, washed handkerchiefs for weeping travelers. I've lit fires for lost souls and left biscuits on doorsteps without ever needing thanks. And at night, when all the rooms are filled with sleep, I walk the halls with a candle and listen to the walls breathe. This place, it holds people gently, it remembers them, and sometimes, when no one's looking, it whispers back. I started this notebook on a whim. Thought it might be nice to leave stories behind, like breadcrumbs in a forest. I asked a few guests if they'd like to write. Some did. Then more. Now, look at it. Each voice in these pages, a light in the woods, and now, I think it's almost full. Which means it's time. There's a girl here now. Room 7. Quiet eyes, slow smile. Carries leaves in her pockets and comes in each night with wind in her hair. I see her reading this, turning pages like they're made of glass. She doesn't know it yet, but she's part of this story too. Maybe more than anyone. So this last entry isn't really mine, it's hers. Maribel, if you're reading this, thank you. You reminded this place it still had more to give. And if you feel it too, if the walls speak softly, if the fire waits a little longer before dying down, if the stars blink a little slower just for you, then maybe you already know what I'm about to say. Some people visit, some people stay, and some become the heart of the story. I'll be leaving in the morning. The keys are in the drawer, the bread is rising on the stove, the firewood is stacked, the beds are already turned down. Sleep well, Maribel. With gratitude, a friend. Maribel's eyes stung, but not from sadness. She pressed her palm to the page, feeling the weight of it, the warmth. She looked around the room, at the flickering firelight, at the stack of quilts on the chair, at the little wooden window, the yellow umbrella photo, the hand-drawn constellation. She felt every story settle around her, like a blanket made of memory. Outside, the wind changed direction. She closed the book, and for the first time, she didn't wonder what tomorrow would bring. She already knew she would stay. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this gentle journey through falling leaves and remembered stories, consider giving it a thumbs up and sharing it with your loved ones. Perhaps they too are carrying untold memories that deserve to be softly heard. For daily stories of calm, subscribe if you haven't already. Good night and sweet dreams from Story Planet.